Okay, action.
Hello everybody, I am in conversation today with Manreet Sodhi Someshwar, who's written the wonderful The Radiance of a Thousand Suns, which is even more wonderfully written, and here's the radiant Manreet with us.
Thank you, Prema. It's wonderful to be here. Thank you for inviting me.
Welcome to India, Manreet.
Thank you. It's
Welcome to
wonderful to be
Delhi
here.
as well. And you brought some fresh air with you from America. I see.
Yes, I did.
Thank you for that.
Hopefully blue skies soon.
Yeah. So, Radiance of a Thousand Suns is a compellingly written book, and I had a wonderful time working with you on this, Manreet. What do you think about the book? What do you feel is the tone of the book? What do you think? Is it a women's story, or is it a human story, or is it about the life of Sikhs in general? Where would you place it?
Okay, well, thank you for the compliment. It's been wonderful working with you, and you're a very fine editor. If a writer can say that herself. As far as the book is concerned, I don't think in terms of classifications really. I mean, I understand. I have a background in sales and marketing, and I understand that you need to have genres to sell to the market. But I think all books are universal stories, and I mean, so I think of The Radiance as certainly a story which is for everybody. But in terms of particularizing what it is really about, I think I would say it's sort of a feminist version of the 70 years of modern Indian history. Mm-hmm. And the reason I say that is that I wrote this book with the idea that I wanted to convey women's stories which have not really come through when we talk about our modern history. Mm-hmm. It really is his story. Mm-hmm. And with that perspective, I started writing this book, and that's why it has what I like to believe is a fairly formidable cast of female characters. Mm-hmm. It's told through a multi-generation family saga. It also has not the token men, but a couple of strong male characters. And I think the story is really a universal one. I did filter it through a particular community, which is a Sikh community, to tell the story, because once again, there are a couple of reasons for that. One is that I myself am a Sikh. I grew up in a border town between India and Pakistan. And I grew up with a lot of stories of 47 and partition. And I was always aware that, come 15th August, we would always talk about the independence of India. Whereas another side of it, which was the concomitant side, the partition, was never really spoken about. It was in a very cursory manner, data. This many million people died, this many million people migrated. And when I started writing, this was one of the things which was with me, which I wanted to explore. However, I guess I was a beginning writer and I didn't have the skill or the maturity to sort of come to that. I also wanted to encompass sort of the milestones in Indian history, and 84 was a big one again. And that for me crystallized that probably I could tell it through the Sikh community, which I think both in 47 and 84 suffered. And as happens with us, we have such an ancient history that we are very amnesiac about things which are recent. And the desire is always to move on and look forward, which is great. But I think it helps to know our stories, our past. Also because, these things have to be talked about. And so that was the reason why I filtered it through a particular community.
Okay, and why do you've already said that the voices of women are usually, not given the kind of importance that they ought to be given. So, did you actually set out to correct that mistake, or, what was the, or did it happen while you were writing the book?
No, I think I was very clear about that right from the beginning. And the reason is that, as I said, we talk about independence, we don't talk about partition. Mm-hmm. And a lot of the stories of women are stories about the pain and the violence that they suffered. Mm-hmm. And considering the patriarchy which is inherent in our society, it was expected that the women would be silenced. Those stories were never really spoken about. Mm-hmm. And I feel that trauma has not been resolved. For instance, the violence we saw in 47 has almost become a template which we saw repeated in almost the exact same fashion in 84, 91, 2002. For instance, one of the rumors in 1984 was that there was these trains full of Hindu corpses which were arriving into Delhi. And in 47 it was trains full of Hindu and Sikh corpses which were arriving. And the fact is that that template exists. And I also wanted to sort of bring in the fact that nobody speaks about women's stories. Women bore the brunt of this violence. You know, it was women's bodies which became the battlefield.
True.
And they're stories of extraordinary courage, because how does a woman choose to live on when so much has happened to her? What are the choices she makes when it's the safety of her own children that is at stake? So I was very clear that I wanted to bring women's voices, and also, you know, violence against women has been commodified to an extent, it's almost a trope. So
That's true.
I took a conscious decision that the narrators of the story would be women. So women are centered and upfront, and they will tell the story. So I give agency to the women to tell the story. And I think
in fact, there's also this trope of pregnant with stories, women pregnant with stories, because they've not been able to let it out all of these years, and you know, they have held it in, and you know, now you know, everyday functioning is difficult for them because those stories need to be told, and till the time that they're told, you know, you won't be able to function properly. So you know, I think that's one of the basic things that you have worked with as well. So yeah, I found that fascinating as well, the whole linking of those tropes, and then the Mahabharata as well coming in between. So why the Mahabharata? Why did you want to put that into the narrative? Because we had this conversation, because I said, you know, is there something that's more related to Sikh history and culture that you would want, or the Mahabharata, which is more pan-Indian? Because I was also thinking in terms of the market here, and the positioning of the book. But you know, why the Mahabharata?
You know, the thing is that when I say this looks at 70 years of independent India, I think in many ways, if you look at the history of Punjab, you can extend it to the history of India. And the reasons is that I feel nowadays we think so much in terms of sort of rigid lines between communities and faith and religion. But if you really look back, the sort of the oldest Veda, the Rig Veda, that was composed in Punjab, right? The Mahabharata, you know, Kurukshetra, historic Punjab if you take, not Punjab as we know now, where it was trifurcated after independence, is the birthplace of, you know, the great epic, which is sort of the foundational epic for our society. And I also, when I was doing my research into 47, the number of times that people actually reference the Mahabharata to make sense of the violence and the chaos that is happening around them. For instance, you know, they spoke about that violence as pralay, in Punjabi use word parle, so parle aali, you know, which is a way of, for people who were suddenly faced with this capitalism, to make sense of it, they resorted to stories which were, you know, their epic, which helped them make sense of the world. So when I was writing it, I was very aware that I wanted to use the Mahabharata as a scaffold on which to build the narrative. And that's also because I feel that when we look at the Mahabharata, there is this phenomenal woman character, which is Draupadi. And if you look at over the period of time, I feel Draupadi has just sort of been stripped of all her agency. She's sort of become this woman who is the wife of 5 men. But when you actually look at the narrative, Draupadi is a woman with agency. She is a woman who questions. She's a woman who's not afraid to show her anger. And I thought here was a template for a woman from our epic, which I could then weave into sort of, you know, as a leitmotif into the narrative. So I was very clear the Mahabharata would be there. I also bring in Heer, who is again a legendary Punjabi woman, who again has sort of faced the same treatment that Draupadi has, which is, you know, you sort of make her feminine and petite and rob her of her agency. And I try to sort of restore that. And I thought it worked well with the overall theme of women's voices and how women face patriarchy and violence and what to do with it.
And for how long has the book been cooking? For, you know, since when did you start thinking? Because it's a broad sweep, it's a long saga. So, you know, for how long have you been thinking of this project? And
I think forever. I think so. I never went to a creative writing school. I'm not even an English literature major. But when I started writing, one of the first stories I wrote, I think that had the genesis of this book. I also grew up during the time of the Sikh militancy, and I watched it very closely. And the story that I wrote was trying to sort of make sense of that, and I realized that I had no idea what I was talking about. And I had to keep going back and try to sort of trace the genesis of all that. And one of the books which arose out of it is The Long Walk Home, which was my first book with HarperCollins. And I think at that point of time, I had a couple of chapters devoted to what became sort of the source for this book, but it got edited out, and I'm glad it did, because I don't think I had the maturity or the skill as a writer to work with a book which has this broad a canvas. But you know, I also believe that life is too short and you have to write big books. When I say big books, I think you have to write books which deal with ideas. Those excite me personally, and with Radiance I was trying to do that. Look at violence, look at silence, try and understand why after 70 years, you know, we still have these squabbles with Pakistan, you know, almost like it's almost an annual tradition, right, the way we go about it.
Yeah.
And the violence against women in our society. Why do we not have answers to that? So the book is trying to explore those and hopefully come up with some suggestions.
Yeah, and the 25th anniversary of the Sikh genocide just passed. So, you know, what were your thoughts on that day? And you know, how do you, since you said that you were in Punjab when the militancy was at its peak, you know, what was that experience like, and what are your thoughts about that incident?
Right. Yeah. So it was actually the 35th anniversary of '84.
Oh,
yeah. Yeah, it's I wrote a couple of essays which have just come out. I think for me, sort of the most conflicting thing has been how this was an event which happened in the capital city of the world's largest democracy, right? It was definitely recorded by media. It has been talked about, people are aware of it. And yet, there really has been no semblance of justice. Justice in terms of, you know, the perpetrators being taken to court and punished. Justice in terms of the reparations which need to be made. And there are very stark things like, since it was violence, which was again committed, men were killed and the women were brutalized. And there is actually a colony called Widows Colony, which is in West Delhi, Vasant Vihar, near Vasant Vihar. And it's called Widows Colony because it is used to house the women who survived because the men folk were killed right in front of them. And I find it difficult to believe that we as a society can continue living and, you know, not have a conversation about this, about people who suffered and whose suffering was public knowledge and hasn't been even sort of recorded. You know, there is not much literature which is available around '84. And I wanted to make that a part of this narrative. And, you know, the idea is that hopefully we start folding these conversations into a national narrative, because that's the only way that these stories can really come out and, you know, sort of become part of what people talk about and discuss.
And Manreet, you shifted to the US now, you live in New York. And so what is your take on violence in India now? Do you think that is increased, or is it just that the instances of people reporting these cases has increased? What do you think is the case? You know, you live there, so I'm sure you have another perspective that's different from ours.
I think women are the world's largest minority, wherever you are, and which is sort of a sad reflection on our society, considering we are half of the humanity. I do feel that Nirbhaya was a turning point in terms of conversations around violence against women in India, to the extent that it made people aware that this issue was there, and it was almost like, you know, sort of a volcano exploding. And I think the conversations around it have increased. There is more maybe reportage, there are more incidents being brought to the surface. I'm not so sure what we are doing to deal with it really, you know. And I think there institutions need to be strengthened, because this cannot be a knee-jerk, you know, every time something happens, okay, what do we do with it right now? I think institutions need to be strengthened so that violence against women, the way it's recorded, the way it's spoken about, is dealt with in a manner which is rigorous, which has a strict protocol, and women know that there is an option, a fallback option. But I think more deeply, we need as a society to sort of examine the roots of our patriarchy and say, what do we do with this? And I feel there telling women's stories, because even in 47, when women were abducted, and this happened on both sides, there were Muslim women who were taken away, there were Sikh and Hindu women who were taken away. And what the governments did was that they started a commission to bring these women back. Okay, so which again then goes back to our mythology, because they actually use the terms like we're bringing our Sitas back, right? But the fact is, a lot of these women had got married, had children, and then you pluck these women back and say, okay, you don't have a husband anymore, you don't have a child. What happens to those women? Those stories are the stories we never speak about. And I really feel that in the Matrix, you can say it's violence and silence. Violence is done by women, and women are supposed to be silent. And I think until we really start to sort of say, we need to open up, we need to hear these stories, we need to air them. Until we do that, we will not be aware of our own sort of complicity in the violence against women. I think that's what we really need in our society.
And the book has a lot of violence in it because of the fact that we're dealing with the history of this section that has faced a lot of violence. How did you manage to make the narrative flow? It must have been a challenging proposition.
Yeah, that's an excellent question, Prema, because I did struggle with the narrative for a bit. I wanted the novel to both entertain and inform, and I finally came to the realization that I could do it through a family saga, and this is a multi-generation family saga. And the idea was to refract the violence and the silence through relationships. And I explore it through love lost and found. So there is a father who's seeking his sister, there is a woman who's seeking her daughters, and through these relationships is how I tell the narrative.
Okay. And Manreet, you've written across genres. So this is literary fiction, you've written racy thrillers. So what is the reason for this kind of variety in what you write? Is it your personality, or are you still looking at finding the perfect kind of genre that fits you best?
I think I want to be like Spielberg. I want to do Schindler's List. I want to do Tintin, Jaws. Yeah, I think I'm a person, I enjoy reading across genres, and I think typically you write what you enjoy reading. So that's sort of one way to look at it. And the other thing is that when I write books which require a lot of research, like this did, like The Long Walk Home did, my way of getting out of that is to write something which is breezier, which hopefully will not require that kind of research. And I think so the sort of the light and to balance it out. I also feel every book needs a certain way of telling it, it requires a certain structure. And for me, I have to get excited about the book, because otherwise, how do I spend the years that it takes to write it? And so if I'm having fun with the book, hopefully the reader is too.
Okay. And would you like to tell readers about the why we named this the Radiance of 1,000 Suns? And
yes, absolutely. So the Radiance of 1,000 Suns, there are, I would say, 3 reasons for it. So one of the main protagonists is a woman called Noora. And Noora literally means somebody who's very radiant. It comes from Noor. So Noora is one of those people, and she is a sort of the moral compass of the book as well. And then the book also references the Mahabharata, as I said, it's built on that scaffolding. And in the Mahabharata, in fact, when Krishna gives the sermon, Bhagavad Gita, there is this when he shows his celestial form, right? And in English it is translated as, it had the radiance of 1,000 suns. And last but not the least, since the book is based on the theme of violence, when the first atom bomb was tested in the desert in New Mexico, Robert Oppenheimer, who is sort of the father of the bomb, and who was a great, who actually learned Sanskrit and was a great fan of the Bhagavad Gita, when he saw the explosion, he said it reminded him of the radiance of 1,000 suns. So I'm hoping all those sort of, threads layer upon each other to bring out why and what the book is about.
Okay, I think we're almost out of time. So one last thing, you've been endorsed by Gulzar Saab twice. So how does it feel to be one of the very few people to have been endorsed by him twice?
It's a great joy. It's a great joy. It's a huge validation, and that's largely because I think I, like all of us, have grown up on Gulzar Saab's sort of multiple offerings, his lyrics, his films, and I've also met him personally, and he's absolutely a wonderful human being. And so yeah, it's a great honor, and it's a validation which almost makes you feel once you got that, you don't need anything else.
That's true. So it was lovely talking to you, Manreet, and thank you for being here, and thank you everybody for watching us. Thank you.